I never imagined sharing this with anyone, not even in the quietest corners of my own mind. My name is Elise, and I'm 44 years old. For 22 years, I've been a single mother, raising my son Lenny all by myself after his father walked out before he was even born. We've always been close, closer than most mothers and sons, I suppose. We've laughed through the good days, cried through the hard ones, and built a life that was just the two of us against the world. I never thought that closeness could shift into something I didn't have a name for. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. That evening started like any other cold winter night in our small house. Lenny had come home from university looking exhausted. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes heavy with the weight of final exams and part-time work that never seemed to end. "Mom, I'm wiped," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck as he stood in the living room. "I don't feel great. Headache, maybe a fever coming on." I felt that familiar pull in my chest, the one that had guided me through every scraped knee and broken heart since he was a little boy. I told him to lie down on my bed. It was bigger and the mattress was softer than his own. "Go on, sweetheart, rest. I'll bring you some tea in a bit." He didn't argue. He shuffled into my room, kicked off his shoes, and collapsed onto the bed with a heavy sigh. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, carrying the bite of winter air that seeped through every crack in our old house. I grabbed the thickest blanket we owned, the one with the faded blue stripes, that we'd had since he was a child, and draped it over him. For a moment it felt perfectly normal, just a mother taking care of her son. I sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing the blanket over his chest, and smiled down at him. "You'll warm up soon. You always do." But then I lay down beside him. It was cold in the house, and the heater was struggling again. I told myself it was practical. Two bodies under one blanket would share warmth faster. Lenny shifted closer almost immediately, as if drawn by some instinct. His arm slipped around my waist, pulling me in the way he used to when he was small, and nightmares chased him from his own bed. I didn't pull away. His breath was warm against my shoulder, steady and slow. I could feel the rise and fall of his chest against my back. It was comforting, familiar, safe. Minutes passed in silence. The house creaked around us, the wind rattling the panes. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet settle over me. His breathing grew deeper, as if sleep was finally claiming him. But then he moved again, closer still. His arm tightened around me, his hand resting just below my ribs. The blanket trapped our shared heat, making everything feel heavier, more intimate. I told myself it was nothing. He was cold. He needed comfort. I was his mother. That was all. Yet something in the air had changed. A tension I couldn't name hummed between us. My heart picked up its pace, beating a little harder against my ribs. I lay perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement would shatter whatever fragile balance we had. Under the blanket, his body pressed against mine more firmly. And then I felt it. Something hard, unmistakable, pressing against the back of my thigh. My breath caught in my throat. Heat flooded my face. For a split second, my mind refused to process what it was. But the truth was there, solid and warm and impossible to ignore. Lenny was aroused. My 22-year-old son was hard against me. I froze, my thoughts spun wildly. This couldn't be happening. He was probably half asleep, unaware. Or maybe it was just a natural reaction to the warmth, to the closeness, to the cold night. I repeated every rational explanation I could think of, but none of them quieted. The sudden rush of confusion and something else, something warmer, deeper, more dangerous, that stirred low in my belly. I wanted to move away. I should have moved away, but my body wouldn't obey. I stayed there, heart hammering, feeling the steady throb of him through the thin fabric of his sweatpants and my nightdress. The silence in the room grew thicker, heavier, until I could hear nothing but the blood rushing in my ears and the soft rhythm of his breathing. Lenny didn't pull back. If anything, he nestled closer, his arm curling more possessively around me. His fingers brushed lightly along my side, almost absent-mindedly, sending tiny sparks across my skin. I bit my lip, fighting the strange flutter that rose in my chest. This was wrong. This was my son. The boy I had nursed, bathed, taught to ride a bike, stayed up all night with when he had the flu. Yet here we were. Two adults sharing a bed, sharing breath, sharing a heat that felt far too intimate for a mother and son. I kept telling myself it would pass. It was just a moment, An awkward, confusing moment that would disappear as soon as he woke up properly. Time stretched. The clock on the nightstand ticked softly. I didn't dare look at it. Lenny's hand moved again, slowly, gently, tracing a small circle on my arm. My skin prickled. A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I closed my eyes tighter, willing my mind to stay blank. But memories flooded in anyway. Lenny as a toddler climbing into my lap for stories. Lenny as a teenager hugging me after his first heartbreak. Lenny now, tall, strong. No longer a boy, but a man whose body was reacting to mine in ways I had no right to notice. Finally, he stirred. He lifted his head, and I felt his gaze on my face even before I opened my eyes. When I did, his expression stopped me cold. His eyes were soft, vulnerable, filled with a mix of nervousness and something deeper, something that looked a lot like longing. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, searching, asking without words if this was okay. My throat tightened. I tried to smile, but it felt shaky, uncertain. "Lenny," I whispered, but the word died before it fully left my lips. He didn't move away. Instead, his fingers brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. The touch was so tender, so careful, that my heart ached. I saw the tiny freckles across his nose, the way his lips parted slightly, the faint flush creeping up his neck. He was beautiful in that moment, my son, yet somehow someone entirely new. The air between us felt charged, electric. I could feel the unspoken questions hanging there. What is this? Why does it feel like this? Why can't I pull away? Then, as suddenly as it had built, he pulled back. He rolled slightly away, rubbing the back of his neck with an embarrassed laugh that sounded forced. "Sorry, Mom," he said, voice low and rough. "I didn't mean to make things weird. I was just cold, really cold." I sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around my shoulders like armor. My pulse was still racing. I wanted to tell him it was fine, that it didn't change anything, that we were still just us. But the words felt thick in my mouth. "It's okay, Lenny," I managed, keeping my voice steady. "We've been alone together for so long. Sometimes things just feel different on nights like this." "It's nothing." He nodded, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. A faint blush colored his cheeks. I reached out and squeezed his shoulder, hoping the familiar gesture would ground us both. For a second, his hand covered mine, warm and strong. Then the moment broke. The doorbell rang, sharp, sudden, slicing through the thick silence like a knife. We both jumped. Relief washed over me at the interruption, even as a strange pang of loss followed it. I stood quickly, smoothing my nightdress, and walked to the front door on legs that still felt unsteady. Mark, our neighbor from next door, stood on the porch with that easy, friendly smile of his. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes that always seemed to linger on me a beat longer than necessary. "Hey, Elise," he said, holding up a small toolbox. "Saw your lights on and figured I'd check if the heating was giving you trouble again. It's freezing out here tonight." I forced a bright smile, hoping the flush on my face didn't show. "Oh, Mark, you're a lifesaver. It has been acting up. Come in, please." He stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots, and immediately started chatting about the cold snap, about how he'd fixed his own furnace earlier. His presence filled the room with normalcy, with the safe, everyday world outside the strange bubble Lenny and I had been trapped in. I laughed at his jokes, offered him coffee, watched as he knelt by the heater in the living room and tinkered with it. But all the while, I felt Lenny's eyes on us. He had come out of the bedroom and stood in the hallway, arms crossed tightly over his chest. His jaw was set, his gaze fixed on Mark with an intensity I hadn't seen before. It looked almost like jealousy, raw, unspoken, and impossible to mistake. When Mark glanced up and asked how Lenny's studies were going, Lenny answered in short, clipped words, never quite smiling. My stomach twisted. What was happening here? Why did the sight of Mark in our house suddenly feel like an intrusion on something private? Something that belonged only to Lenny and me? Mark worked efficiently, explaining what he'd adjusted, promising the heat would kick in stronger now. He stood, wiping his hands, and his eyes met mine again, warm, concerned, a little too attentive. "You okay, Elise? You seem a bit distracted tonight." I waved it off with a laugh that sounded too high. "Just tired, long day. Thank you so much, Mark. Really." He lingered at the door a moment longer than necessary, as if sensing there was more going on. "Anytime. You know I'm right next door. Call if you need anything. At all." His hand brushed my arm lightly as he left, a friendly gesture that suddenly felt loaded in the charged atmosphere of the house. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The house felt different now, smaller, heavier. When I turned, Lenny was still standing in the hallway, staring at me. His expression was unreadable, but his posture was tense, shoulders rigid. "You okay?" I asked softly, stepping closer. He shrugged. "Yeah, fine. Just didn't expect him to show up like that." His voice was low, almost flat, but I heard the undercurrent, the same tension that had wrapped around us under the blanket. I wanted to say more, to reach out and pull him into a hug the way I always had. But something held me back. The air between us felt too fragile, too full of things we weren't ready to name. Lenny turned without another word and walked down the hall to his room. The soft click of his door closing echoed like a question left unanswered. I stood there for a long moment, heart still racing, mind replaying every second of the evening. The warmth of his body, the hardness I had felt, the look in his eyes, the jealousy when Mark arrived. My legs carried me back to my bedroom on autopilot. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the same bed where everything had shifted, and buried my face in my hands. The blanket still held the faint scent of him, soap, and warmth and something uniquely. Lenny. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. But the images wouldn't stop. The way his arm had tightened around me, the way his breath had brushed my neck, the way my own body had responded before my mind could catch up. I told myself it was nothing, a one-time awkward moment. We were close, that was all. We had been everything to each other for so long, mother and son. Best friends, each other's whole world. Feelings like this didn't belong here. They couldn't. And yet, as I sat there in the quiet room, the heater now humming steadily thanks to Mark, I couldn't shake the deep, unsettling truth. Something between us had changed tonight. Something irreversible, and I had no idea how to fix it, or if I even wanted to. The knock on my bedroom door came softly, almost hesitantly. My heart leapt into my throat. I knew who it was before I even spoke. "Come in," I called, my voice steadier than I felt. The door creaked open, and Lenny stood there, silhouetted in the hallway light. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. He didn't speak at first. He just crossed the room and sat on the bed beside me, hands clasped tightly in his lap, eyes fixed on the floor. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with everything we hadn't said. "Mom," he began finally, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry if I made things weird earlier." I reached out and placed my hand over his. His skin was warm, familiar. I squeezed gently, offering the only comfort I knew how to give. "It's okay, Lenny. We've been through a lot together. Sometimes things get complicated. We don't have to figure it all out tonight." He nodded slowly, but when he looked up at me, his eyes held a storm, confusion, frustration, and something raw and unspoken that made my breath catch. He rested his head on my shoulder, just like he used to when he was small. I wrapped my arm around him without thinking, pulling him close. His body relaxed against mine. But underneath the familiar comfort, I felt the new tension. The awareness that we were no longer just mother and son in this moment. We were two people navigating feelings that had no map. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, wrapped in silence and each other. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the heater. For a brief second, it almost felt peaceful. But deep down, I knew the peace was fragile. The night wasn't over. The feelings weren't gone. And whatever came next, we would have to face it together, whether we were ready or not. The silence in my bedroom felt heavier than before. Lenny's head still rested on my shoulder, his breathing slow and even, but I could sense the storm raging inside him. My arm remained wrapped around him, holding him close in that familiar, protective way I had done thousands of times throughout his life. Yet nothing about this moment felt familiar anymore. The warmth of his body against mine carried a new weight, one that made my heart race, and my thoughts spiral in directions I had always believed were forbidden. After what seemed like an eternity, Lenny lifted his head. His eyes met mine, dark and intense, filled with a mixture of vulnerability and something deeper, more urgent. "Mom," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know what to do with all these feelings. I don't want to make things harder between us, but I can't ignore them either." His words hung in the air like a confession. I felt my throat tighten. I had spent the last hour trying to convince myself that what happened under the blanket was just a momentary lapse, nothing. more than the closeness of a cold night and two lonely people. But hearing him say it out loud shattered that fragile denial. My son was admitting to feelings that mirrored the confusing warmth I had felt stirring inside me: desire, longing, pull that went far beyond the bond of mother and son. I opened my mouth to respond, searching desperately for the right words, words that would comfort him, set boundaries, remind us both of who we were. But before any sound could leave my lips, another firm knock echoed through the house. We both startled, the sound slicing through the thick tension like a blade. My pulse spiked. Lenny pulled back slightly, his expression shifting from vulnerable to guarded in an instant. I stood up on unsteady legs and walked to the front door, smoothing down my nightdress as if that could somehow restore normalcy. When I opened it, Mark stood there again, his face etched with genuine concern. The porch light cast soft shadows across his features, making him look both reliable and somehow intrusive at the same time. "Sorry to bother you again, Elise," he said, his voice low and careful. "I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off earlier. You seemed tense. Is everything okay? If you need to talk, or if there's anything I can do." I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder toward the hallway where I knew Lenny was listening. The air in the house felt charged, as if every unspoken word between my son and me was pressing against the walls. Mark's presence, usually so welcome and steady, now felt like an unwelcome spotlight on the secret we were barely containing. "We're fine, Mark," I replied, forcing a small smile. "Really? It's just been a long day. Lenny's been stressed with exams and the cold isn't helping. Thank you for checking, though. It means a lot." Mark's eyes searched mine for a moment longer than necessary. He shifted his weight, clearly not fully convinced. "All right. But remember, I'm right next door, day or night. You don't have to handle everything alone." His hand reached out and gently squeezed my upper arm, a gesture meant to be comforting, but one that sent a flicker of awkwardness through me given the circumstances. As he turned to leave, I caught Lenny's silhouette in the hallway. He was standing perfectly still, arms crossed tightly, watching the exchange with an intensity that made my stomach twist. The jealousy I had glimpsed earlier was back, sharper now, burning in his eyes even as he tried to mask it. When the door clicked shut behind Mark, the sound echoed like a final punctuation mark on the fragile peace we had been clinging to. I leaned against the closed door for a moment, gathering my thoughts, my heart pounding. When I turned around, Lenny was closer than I expected, only a few steps away. His gaze locked on me. The look in his eyes was raw, unguarded, a mixture of frustration, confusion, and unmistakable desire. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his body once more. "Lenny," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. But he shook his head slightly, cutting me off. "Why does he keep coming over?" he asked, his tone low and edged with something I had never heard from him before: possessiveness. "Why does he look at you like that? Like he wants something from you?" I blinked, caught off guard by the directness of his words. "Mark is just a neighbor, sweetheart. He's being kind. That's all." Lenny's jaw tightened. He took another step closer, and suddenly the hallway felt too narrow, too intimate. "He touches your arm. He checks on you all the time. And tonight, right after what happened between us, he shows up again. It feels like he's trying to take you away." His words hit me like a wave. I had raised Lenny to be respectful, independent, kind. But in this moment, he sounded like a man staking a claim. My son, my boy, was looking at me with eyes that held adult hunger, adult jealousy. The realization sent a confusing rush of heat through my body, mixing with the guilt that threatened to overwhelm me. "Lenny, listen to me," I said softly, reaching out to place my hands on his chest to create some space. But the moment my palms touched him, I felt the rapid beat of his heart, the firmness of his muscles beneath his shirt. My fingers lingered longer than they should have. "Mark is nothing more than a friend. You and we've always been each other's world. No one is taking that away." He covered one of my hands with his own, pressing it harder against his chest. His skin was warm, almost feverish. "But things are different now, Mom. I felt it tonight. You felt it too. I know you did. When we were under the blanket, when I was close to you, it wasn't just because I was cold. I've been trying to ignore it for months, but I can't anymore. You're not just my mom to me right now. You're beautiful. You're the only woman who's ever really known me, who's always been there." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I wanted to deny everything, to pull away and reestablish the safe boundaries that had defined our relationship for 22 years. But my body betrayed me. A deep, aching warmth spread through me at his words, at the honesty in his voice. I had been lonely for so long, raising him alone, putting my own needs aside, never allowing myself to think of romance or desire because Lenny had been my entire focus. Now, hearing him voice the very thoughts I had been fighting, it felt both terrifying and liberating. "Lenny, we can't," I whispered, even as my hands trembled against his chest. "I'm your mother. This isn't right. It could destroy everything we have." He leaned in closer, his forehead nearly touching mine. His breath mingled with my own, warm and shaky. "I know it's wrong. I've told myself that 100 times. But when I'm with you, nothing else feels real. Tonight, lying next to you, feeling you against me, I wanted more. I still want more. And when Mark was here, touching you, I felt like I was losing you, like someone else might see what I see in you." His hand moved slowly, cupping the side of my face with a gentleness that made my knees weak. His thumb brushed across my cheek, wiping away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. The touch was so tender, so full of longing, that I found myself leaning into it despite every voice in my head screaming for me to stop. Our faces were inches apart now. I could see every detail. The slight stubble on his jaw, the way his lips parted with nervous anticipation, the depth of emotion in his eyes that mirrored my own inner turmoil. For one suspended moment, time seemed to stop. The house was silent except for the low hum of the heater and the pounding of our hearts. I felt torn between the mother who had protected him his entire life and the woman who was responding to the man standing before her. My breath came in shallow gasps. His gaze dropped to my lips, then back to my eyes. Asking permission he knew he shouldn't seek. "Mom," he breathed, the word both a plea and a confession. I should have pulled away. I should have sent him to his room, demanded we never speak of this again. Instead, my hand slid up to rest against his neck, feeling the rapid pulse there. The pull between us was magnetic, years of closeness twisting into something new, something forbidden and intoxicating. Our lips were so close now that I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. Just as the distance between us began to close, a sudden loud creak, from the old house perhaps, the wind or the settling foundation, broke the spell. We both jerked back, breathing hard, eyes wide with shock at how close we had come. Lenny ran a hand through his hair, looking dazed and guilty. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady myself, my mind reeling from the nearness of the line we had almost crossed. I'm sorry," he stammered, voice cracking. "I didn't mean to. God, Mom, I don't know what's happening to me." I took a deep, shaky breath, forcing myself to find strength I wasn't sure I had. "We both need time, Lenny. This is confusing for both of us. We've been each other's everything for so long that the lines have blurred. But we can't let this destroy us. You're my son. I love you more than anything in this world. We have to find a way to keep that love without crossing into something we can't come back from." He nodded slowly, though the conflict in his eyes remained. "I know, but it's hard. Being close to you has always felt so natural, and now it feels like more. I don't want to lose you, Mom. Not as my mother, not as whatever this is becoming." We stood there in the hallway for several long minutes, the weight of our emotions pressing down on us. Eventually, I reached out and pulled him into a hug, this time trying desperately to make it maternal, safe, familiar. He held me tightly, his arms strong around my waist, his face buried in my hair. I could feel the tension in his body, the way he fought to control himself. I stroked his back soothingly, whispering soft reassurances even as my own heart ached with the same forbidden longing. When we finally separated, the exhaustion of the night was written on both our faces. "Go get some sleep, sweetheart," I said gently, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "We'll talk more tomorrow when we're clearer headed. Everything will be okay. We'll figure this out together, like we always have." Lenny gave me a small, sad smile and nodded. He turned toward his room but paused at the doorway, looking back at me one last time. "I love you, Mom, no matter what." "I love you too, Lenny, more than you'll ever know." He disappeared into his room, the door clicking shut softly behind him. I stood alone in the hallway, leaning against the wall for support as the full weight of the evening crashed over me. My body still tingled from his touch. My mind replayed every charged glance and whispered word. Guilt warred with an unexpected thrill. Love clashed with desire, and the deep bond we had always shared now felt both precious and dangerously fragile. I walked back to my bedroom on trembling legs and sat on the edge of the bed once more. The blanket from earlier still lay rumpled, carrying the faint scent of our shared warmth. I picked it up and held it to my chest, closing my eyes as tears finally slipped free. What had started as a simple act of comfort on a cold night had opened a door neither of us could easily close. Lenny was no longer just my little boy. He was a man with desires, with feelings that now included me in ways that shook the very foundation of our relationship. As the night deepened and the house grew quiet around me, I lay down alone under the covers, staring at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. My thoughts kept drifting back to the feeling of his body against mine, the tenderness in his touch, the jealousy in his eyes when Mark appeared. I wondered what tomorrow would bring, whether we would pretend none of this had happened, or whether the unspoken attraction would continue to grow, pulling us closer despite every rational reason to resist. Deep down, a small, terrifying part of me wondered if we even wanted to resist. The hours ticked by slowly. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me. But my dreams were filled with warmth, closeness, and a forbidden tenderness that left me waking in the early morning, light with a racing heart, and an ache I couldn't name. Whatever came next, one thing was certain. The relationship between Lenny and me had changed forever, and as his mother, as the woman who had raised him, I would have to find the strength to guide us through this uncharted territory, protecting the love we had always shared while confronting the new, dangerous feelings that now threatened to redefine everything. For now, though, the house was silent once more. Lenny slept in his room and I lay awake in mine, both of us bound by the same confusing emotions, the same deep love, and the same uncertain future that stretched out before us like the cold winter night itself.